I'd just like to introduce some flexible moulding. What we're going to do today is a ceiling rose. And these are just a few examples. And these are two other types of flexible mouldings. Now the reason we call them flexible, because that's exactly what they are. They're flexible. These are self-lubricating, so there's no need to prepare them with linseed oil or any other releasing agents, such as tallow. You may notice different colours. The different colours represent different rates of flexibility. So if you was doing cement work, your rubber mould would be more rigid. If you was doing plaster work, it'll be more flexible. The rubber comes in two types. In its raw state, it looks something like this. So these are cut up into squares. As you can see, they've all been pre-formed. And this goes into a heater and it's melted to, I believe, about 170 degrees. And then we pour this into a model, and the result of that model is this ceiling rose. Another type of flexible rubber you can buy is a material called cold pour. This is where two chemicals are mixed together, but the results are the same. They both produce a flexible mould. I'm just going to cut the corners out, because this helps stop the gathering. If there's too much materials, it starts to gather on the mould. As you can see, I'm building up some layers of reinforcement. This is the timber lath that I mentioned. I'll just pull that back up slightly so you can see where I'm going to cut. You'll notice there's a rim going all around the outside, and with your timber lath you need to come just short of the rim. By say 15 millimetres. Then I'm going to do two more. And we call these bearers. If you notice, they're cut slightly short. Then you've got one more. And we use this as a strike off. The outside rim, the top edge, is where we strike off the plaster as we go along. So what I need to do now, I need to soak these in water. As you can imagine, this timber is dry. And if we place this in our timber mould in a dry condition, the moisture from the plaster would go into the lath, and that would cause surface cracking. So if you soak them in water, it helps prevent the cracking and also helps reduce expansion. You tend to mix plaster with your hands, so you can use some barrier cream or you can use some latex gloves, whatever suits you. It's important to put the barrier cream on, otherwise the plaster will soak into the pores of your hands and just makes it difficult to wash off. Using our two bowls in this case, I'm going to half fill this with water and just sprinkle in some casting plaster. Now for a small mould, like this flood mould, we would probably just use one bowl. For a larger mould, we use two bowls or more, and we call it first and seconds. The tip with casting is to sprinkle the water, the powder rather, into the bowl. And just let it settle into the water. So the plaster needs to go just below the surface of the water. Now with our seconds, what I'm going to do is put this to one side. As soon as you put your fingers in and start mixing it, it agitates the plaster and it increases or makes the plaster start to set. So the tip is, sprinkle it in, put it to one side. As you can see, most of the water's been soaked up now, so I can start to mix this with my fingers. And you need to mix it to a lump-free consistency, just like double cream. Just pour a small quantity into the middle. Wash your hands as you go along, work clean. Then using your splash brush, brush the plaster into all the crevices. And the reason to do this, if you don't, your finished work may contain some air bubbles. Now there's a tendency to pour too much plastering. You must remember that fibrous work is meant to be lightweight. So give us a good stabbing with the plaster, getting into all the crevices or enrichments as we call it in plastering. Again, wash the brush. Take the brush out of the bucket. Just go around with the strike off. So using your splash brush, you need to splash lightly over the top of the plaster you've brushed in. What we're trying to do is build a film of plaster approximately 3mm. But what you can do if you want to, you can use your fingers. So you can use your brush or your fingers. And as you see, I'm splashing around the rim, because this rim will fit against the ceiling. And all we need to do is cover the rubber. As you can see now, there's no rubber showing through this ceiling rose. Round with your strike off. Wash your strike off. And what we need to do now is wait for this plaster to pick up. Plaster now is starting to pick up. You may have noticed that it's starting to turn matte. What you can't do is let this plaster set. It needs to be continuous. So just touch the fingers. It's starting to pick up. So remember, I cut some hessian. You may have noticed that I trimmed the corners. And this is so we can fold it back. If you don't do the cuts, what happens is when you fold the hessian in, it starts to gather. So lightly place it into position. Using our seconds, if you remember we haven't touched it, we can now mix this now. So I'm just going to pour a little bit in the middle. Again, you can either use your fingers if you want to, or use the brush. But you need to be very careful, because what you don't want to do is push the hessian through to the rubber. Now the reason you brush from the centre outwards is to stop any voids or any air bubbles forming, which will only weaken the plaster cast. So the hessian now is firmly brushed in. And then wash your brush out. But don't leave this in the bucket. So I'm going to put some timber laths on now. If you remember, I soaked them in water. Just put a bit of plaster on first. That one in there. And place that one in there. And what you can do, you can dip it in the plaster, or you can lay the hessian straight on top of the mould. It just doesn't really matter. It's what suits you really. And we'll just drop that one there. And then just fold it in. And I'm going to fold the edges back in. And then just brush this in there on the sides. Again, just trying to reinforce the perimeter of the ceiling rows. Now we can try to increase the band on the outside to about 10 millimeters, because this edge will be stuck to the ceiling with adhesive. Again, fingers or brush, but I like using fingers. What the throw-in action actually does, it makes the plaster set and gives it a little bit more adhesion. Remembering that the ceiling rose does need to be lightweight, so using a small piece of timber, using the strike-offs, we just need to smooth over a small section. And this allows the ceiling rose to fit firmly on the ceiling. So all we'll need to do now is just wait for that plaster to set, and then we can prise it out of the mould in probably about 30 minutes or so. If you really want to make sure it's set, put your hand over. You may notice it starts to go hot. When it starts to cool down, it should be ready. But if you've got a little bit of plaster in your bowl, if you crack it open, and it comes away in one piece and the bowl's clean, the chances are the plaster's set. So, I'm going to bring the rubber mould just to the edge of the spot and stand. Turn it round and gently prise away the rubber mould from the plaster cast. Bring it over, just let it drop down. And hopefully the weight of the rubber, it should just free itself really. Slide my hand in, turn it over. So there's the finished article. So the important thing with this cast is it's meant to be lightweight. So the back is just as important as the front. So they're the bearers. That fits flush against the ceiling. So the adhesive will go around the edges, across there, and on top of that we'll put a couple of screws through there, and the screws will go through the timber for additional fixing.